Timer. There you go. I'm resident of Collinwood, joined by my buddy Patrick McCray, author of the Dark Shadows Daybook, and my buddy Butch RosenBalm. How are you guys?
Oh my God. I'm great.
I think we woke Patrick up. Sorry, man.
We're here to discuss Psycho 1 and 2. So
I'm thinking about the monsters. I'm thinking about the. Dinner robot.
I actually watched that at a neighbor's house this past couple of days. Because I don't have
Did you finish it?
Yeah, I finished it.
Did you find it boring? I found it boring. That's why I stopped watching it.
I think, let me say this, because look, we all love old nostalgic shows, okay? We all do, all three of us. And The Monsters is no different. But I think it goes to show you, when you try, the jokes to me were very dated. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But I think if you're going to do that and make fun of, dry humor's funny, I don't mind it. But you need to nail your jokes. You need to get your audience, because it felt like The Monsters was meant more for a live stage audience than it was a filmed audience.
That's interesting. I actually, they've been making a modern day version of the Munsters for years, and it's been very funny, and it's called What We Do in the Shadows.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, I hadn't seen it yet. I've not been in a hurry.
I was, because I'm a big Rob Zombie fan, and wow, was it boring. I mean, that's the thing, is I stopped about 14 minutes in when this date with Count Orlok just won't stop. And he was doing some sort of, I don't know, hipster kid dance, whatever the kids are doing nowadays, the mashed potato or whatnot. And I just bored out of my mind. And that's the one thing I didn't expect from a Rob Zombie movie, was to be bored. Or if I'm going to be bored, it's going to be like in Lords of Salem, where I'm supposed to be bored because it's a Kubrick movie, but, pretty much.
I think that, again, to me, this movie felt like it wasn't made to be a movie. It was made more for a stage audience. It felt like,
or a tax write-off,
or like a studio audience. You needed, because I'll tell you my funniest moment in the movie where I cracked up, when Herman Monster walks in on the scientist who made him, and he's got leprosy on the side of his face. And he's like, "Hey, you look different." And I'm like, "Oh, Jesus Christ."
They ripped that joke off of Ben-Hur when he goes to the leper colony and sees his family. Now that's funny. But William Wyler nailed wacky comedy.
Yeah. Again, we're here to discuss Psycho 1 and 2.
Which is California Gothic as a genre, which the Munsters is part of.
Yes. So this stars Anthony Perkins. Janet Leigh's in this movie. And it's funny, Janet Leigh's been well over 100 films, but this is the movie she's going to be most remembered for, because of a very famous shower scene. And, she's actually a character who steals money, a woman who works at the bank. She steals her boss's money, if you will, and drives away, buys another car, and then keeps driving. You got the great soundtrack in this movie, which is awesome. So when did you guys first see the original Psycho?
Butch?
I saw it. It was around 80, 81. It was on local channel 43 before it was a Fox affiliate. Jules heard me mention this before, and it was on a little black and white TV, so I didn't realize that it was, quote, in black and white. So I got the TV version, but I remember, I'm embarrassed to admit this now. Of course, I was about 10, 11, 12. at the beginning, after she steals the money and all that's going on, I'm like, oh my God, can you hurry up and get to the
Yeah.
to the hotel? And now I watch it, I'm like, that, I'm not gonna say it's my favorite part, but I enjoy it, and it's just like I want to reach back through time and slap myself in the face.
Well, Butch, you every sympathy towards you on that, because you grew up in a world that Hitchcock did not make the movie for. Your father wanted you to have this when you were old enough. No, but seriously, Hitchcock did not make it for a world where everyone knew about the hotel and Norman Bates and so on. They made it for a movie. They made the movie for a world where everyone thought Janet Leigh was a great big star. I mean, she was, but and that they were going to see a thriller about Janet Leigh, bad girl on the run.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, Hitchcock went through great pains to tell people, don't spoil the movie. I'm not going to let anybody in after after the first 2 or 3 minutes of the movie, or maybe even after the credits started. And that's a thing. And so, it's a tough sell. I think you really have to warn people that it's kind of 2 or 3 different movies all stitched together. It's kind of a self-contained anthology in that sense. And because they're all expecting Norman Bates, they're all expecting, this thing to be a traditional horror movie, and it's not in any sense. Because, of course, the way we think of a traditional horror movie hadn't been invented yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something, as Psycho is kind of known as the great grandfather, if you will, of horror / slasher films. It's not what you expect. It's not, Michael Myers or Freddy or Jason. It's much more subtle.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm sorry, I got totally distracted. Jewel now has a halo.
Phil
He's
has
even
always-
more of a
Phil
saintly
has
figure
always
than he
had a
was
halo.
before. It's literal now, though. It's literal.
Have you not seen it before?
It's really great. Ave Maria. Butch, I missed most of what you said just because I was fascinated with this Italian, Renaissance fresco that appeared in front of me.
Go ahead and talk. I gotta go turn up my light.
That's what he calls it. Okay.
Hey, those halos don't
wait.
like themselves. Sometimes you got to do things like that.
They don't.
Oh,
They don't.
So when did you first see Psycho, Patrick?
Yeah.
I think it was maybe 84 or 85. It was on the movie channel. They were doing some sort of like Halloween night festival of movies or something. And of course it was on it, the 9 to 10 slot, or the later slot, because they would do, 7 to 9, then 9 to 10, or 9 to 11. And I had heard about it forever. My father was a big fan of Psycho and would talk about it, and the shower scene and the general shocking nature of the movie. And he apparently, this is true, he apparently really resembled Anthony Perkins when he was a younger man. And so, he had to deal with that when the movie came out. He looked like Norman Bates. And then he took off the dress. But no, he's not a transvestite. But he apparently did look like it. So we talked about Psycho a lot. So talk about expectations. And I mean, I think I was out like a light before she even left Arizona. This one that rain when she's driving, I was gone. And then I think I woke up around the time that the lights swinging in the root cellar and so on. It's a great movie. So then I think I tried watching it again a few years later, and I was bored out of my mind. And it was finally around the time I was 17 or 18. They showed it at the Vogue for Mother's Day, which is the sort of thing Carl would do. It was wonderfully perverse. And I enjoyed it more because I knew what to expect. And it's a movie. I hate to say it's a movie for grown-ups, but it's a movie for grown-ups or teenagers who have their expectations exactly aligned properly. Because if they're expecting anything else, God help them.
Yeah, it's when I first saw this, it was 1992. My mom showed it to me on VHS, and I did not see this on TV until actually after Scream. But I'm glad I saw it on VHS first because
it's how Hitchcock intended it to be seen.
Right, but I really enjoyed it, and it's funny you say about falling asleep. My mom said that to me before putting it in. She goes, "Now listen, don't fall asleep on this movie," and I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "Why are you guys saying that to me?" So when you said that, I'm thinking those words sound familiar.
Then you found out. Then you found out. Psycho, sponsored by the makers of Ambien. If you don't know what you're getting into.
Yeah. And when she does this little heist, and I'm thinking, wait, this woman's a thief. But once she gets to the hotel and you start seeing she's having second thoughts, she's thinking about turning back and going back. It's like, okay, and when she's talking to Norman Bates, and you don't suspect Norman's this crazy person to me. Like Anthony Perkins, it's funny. When I think about Anthony Perkins, I sort of go back to Henry Fonda in Once Upon a Time in the West. Anthony Perkins wasn't known for playing a heel. He was a baby face. When I first saw Anthony Perkins,
right, of the Yankees.
When I first saw Anthony Perkins, I saw him in a Western with Henry Fonda, The Tin Star, where he played a sheriff.
Yeah.
And so it's like, this was my second time seeing Anthony Perkins, and I had to go tell my grandfather Anthony Perkins played a serial killer. But he's like, yeah, I knew that. I was thinking, you did not tell me this. But it's really, Anthony Perkins to me is more memorable in this movie. And I love Janet Leigh, but to me, he puts over Janet Leigh as much as Janet Leigh puts over herself.
Sure. And in some ways, he's twice the lady. but or is it Jamie Lee? He pulls off a remarkable performance in this film, because there are some movies where I don't know if you experience this phenomenon, but there are some movies where once it starts, even if I've seen it a million times, there's a little voice in the back of my head that says, turn the channel. But also there's a voice in the back of my head that really says, maybe it won't end the same way. These characters seem so likable. Maybe this time when we watch Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, they're just going to have a nice night. And I know that's not the case, but that's a tribute to the writing, and that's a tribute to the acting, that they set up so many potentials, and that the most surprising potential is the one that seems the most unlikely. So the more I watch Psycho, the more I'm rooting for Norman. Not Norman the killer. Norman the tortured son who's trying not to be the killer. And you can tell, maybe it's just me reading into it, but you can tell, because Norman's psychotic, because he has the split personality, what I think of as real Norman is horrified by what Norman the son is doing or being made to do. And one of the great questions in the movie, I think, is how much does Norman really know about what the other Norman is doing? You know, we think that maybe he believes it's all the mother. I don't think so. I think the real Norman knows pretty much exactly what's happening. It may be a distant memory. For a while, he may have thought it was just a dream or something, but I think he is aware of who he is and what he is, and is desperately helpless to stop it.
What do you think, Butch?
I think that is such a good comment that it's above my pay grade. It kind of makes me think of like the proverbial, who's the real character, Clark Kent or Superman or Bruce Wayne or Batman. I'm going to stick with Batman for just a second because, like Norman Bates, the character had something horrible happen to him as a child, and he developed this other persona to protect him in essence. And I have lots of theories about Batman. One of them is that Bruce Wayne died with his parents, and but another one is no, he was just changed, much like Norman was changed by the death of his father, and then his perceived abandonment by his mother. And who's to say Norma never seemed quite is Norma really her name, or did I just make that up?
I don't know what her name was.
Okay. Well, if I say Norma, that I'm referring to the mother. But Norma never struck me as a very mentally healthy person. So who's to say she didn't have some kind of personality disorder, mental disorder, and she just passed it on? And then all these things happen to him, and it's just like he was a kid. He doesn't know how to handle it. Boom.
Yeah. I mean, there's a history of mental illness in the family, but of course, it's not his mother, as we later find out.
I'll say this. I'll tell you when I realized Norman knew. When they're coming around and when they start poking the questions, when Arbogast starts poking around and he deliberately lies about the guest, that to me isn't just protecting your mother, it's you're protecting something else too.
Yeah.
Because if you really felt an ounce of sorrow for that woman or any other murder, because what I take away too is she's not the first woman killed there.
No, there's two others. They mentioned two others.
Yeah, she's the first woman we see. But
Lee?
We see, sorry. But it's really interesting because when Arbogast is questioning him and he lies, oh, that woman didn't stay here. And Arbogast looks at the guest book. Oh, you see, she checked in right here under, and oh, yeah. And then Arbogast goes back because he's not satisfied he didn't get to talk to the mother. So, well, who he thinks.
But he did,
But to me, that's when I first started suspecting Norman had more to do with the murders. Because again, we're not supposed to know whether Mother is alive or dead until the end. But because that's the best shock about Psycho. Again, all too familiar. We're going off Ted Ginn here a bit, to a degree. But it's really good how they build this and make you think, okay, is Norman just this helpless victim, or is he an accomplice, or does he have something directly to do with the murders himself? Those are questions that any classroom should ask about Psycho.
It should.
Yeah, I remember reading something, and I really agree with it. Like Patrick said, this was supposed to be a horror suspense movie with Janet Leigh, and bad girl Janet Leigh on the run, and she's killed 30 minutes into it, and you're like, oh well, crap, who am I supposed to root for now? And without even thinking about it, you go straight to Norman, and sweet little Norman as I call him, the little boy Norman. That's not the killer.
The real Norman, kind of the
Or
victim, the
was the
kid.
real, yeah. And you're like, oh, that poor boy. He's so dominated by his mother and all these people. Won't they just leave him alone? He obviously doesn't have anything to do with it. And the sad part is there's certain films. Planet of the Apes is another one. Soylent Green is another one. The endings are so good and such a shock the first time you see it, if you don't already know it, of course. It just shakes you, and you're like, wow, that was really good. And I think this is one of the, if not the earliest movie where you have a main character being killed off, and you're kind of like, okay, what's going to happen now?
Yeah, before Scream would go on to try to set a precedent with an early killing, Psycho was the first, really. Because here's Janet Leigh. She's a known actress. You aren't expecting her to be killed off or her character to be killed off, but she is. So it's who do you gravitate toward? And really, I think the movie answers this beautifully by not just giving you the aspect of Norman, but the aspect of Arbogast, the aspect of her sister, the girl's sister, and the girl's boyfriend, Sam Loomis.
Sure.
They really do a good job of introducing the other characters, because now you're sort of wondering, like the sisters, did Sam Loomis know she was going to steal the money? Did Sam Loomis know that she was going to take it? And when you gather, by the way, is okay, no, Sam Loomis did not know.
Are Sam Loomis, Dr. Loomis, and Willie Loomis related?
Yes.
It's a shared universe. Finally, the three Lumi continue.
Well, here's the thing too. Two of the three Loomises released some sort of evil into this world. Good job, guys.
And now, wait a minute. Dr. Loomis, Dr. Samuel Loomis, is actually named for the character. I've read that more than once. And I believe John Carpenter actually has admitted that. I could be wrong. But,
well, Donald Pleasance has that kind of, shirtless, brawny John Gavin masculinity that, we associate. I mean, imagine, switch the casts. Yeah. Have Donald Pleasance lounging in bed with Janet Leigh. I mean, that's a creepy beginning of it. Marion. Yeah.
Here's the biggest.
She's getting out of that hotel room real fast.
Here's the biggest difference with Donald Pleasance and Sam Loomis. Donald Pleasance is Sam Loomis. They actually use Donald Pleasance's actual age for the character. So they're sort of using Loomis's, like, Pleasance's birth from the time of 78. Like they're establishing he's from the same era as Pleasance is. So that's the thing. But
at some point, I gotta tell a John Gavin story.
Go ahead.
I got a good John Gavin story, but that'll be later.
Okay. But they do a real good job of indicating that he didn't know. And so her, the boyfriend and the sister now go on and become a part of this investigation, but in a different way. They do it in an undercover way, which is really cool. It puts them in danger. They're wondering about Arbogast. The sheriff just dismisses. Oh, he might. At first, he's like, well, he might have just blew you off, and they're like, no. Which I love. Arbogast is one. Even though he gets killed, he's one of the most interesting characters in Psycho, because he's not just about the money. He's about finding out the truth.
But I think a lot of the, let's say, more major characters leaving out the sheriff, all the main characters are interesting.
Yeah.
Janet Leigh's interesting. John Gavin's interesting. Norman Bates is interesting. The sister's interesting. Arbogast is interesting. You just like, okay. And I remember I was watching it 2 nights ago, and I was like, why does the sister just trust Arbogast so much? And it's like, because well, one thing, it's what, 60 years ago. But another thing, he just comes across as he's a private detective, but he's a good guy. He's trying to help. It's not like Joel just said. He's not just picking up a check, looking into this. He's, yes, he's going to get paid, but he's trying to help. And
she was also a big fan of Archie Bunker's Place. She'd watched every episode. So Martin Balsam on that just immediately is warm and likable and, a pal. Martin Balsam, here's a completely unrelated thing. Martin Balsam was the original voice, this is true, of Hal in 2001.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know if they got into, the recording and Kubrick didn't like it or whatever, but he was originally cast as Hal. And, you think about it, he does project a warm sense of authority. And I think Douglas Rain had more of an innocent sound. Hal's Martin Balsam, if he says, "I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that." Well, I think Dave would have just said, "Okay, well, okay, if you say so."
Yeah, there's some iron in that voice. There's some steel. You're like, okay, well, crap. Whereas
with a Canadian, you can just kind of whatever.
Okay, anyway. Buddy, sure. Hey, while we got just a second, I have to admit this. My mother's ringtone on my phone is the violins. And I wish I could get the, "Oh God, Mother," to put me at the end of it. Me and my wife were at Walmart a couple of years ago, and we're checking out, and my mom calls, and the cashier's like looking at me because, yay, yay, yay. I was like, "Hey, Mom." And the cashier starts cackling. She's like, "Oh my God, I can't believe that's your mother's ringtone." Mom knows I don't. She was not as amused as I was, but so far everybody else is pretty darn amused.
If Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman had made Psycho, would it have been called Pussy?
Of course you are.
Oh my God.
Another thing that I noticed, and I'd kind of forgotten how much Manfredini from Friday the 13th took those cues. The first part of it, they're in the credits, and when Mother first kills, I mean that's like Friday the 13th territory right there with the music and the sound. You got those cues.
You want to talk about the music? Where does the music show up completely over the opening credits in what other classic horror film?
Jaws?
No, Reanimator.
Oh, yeah.
The opening credits music to Reanimator is the music to Psycho. I don't know how they got away with that, but they did.
Do you think they paid for it?
I'm sure they did.
Sooner or later.
Copyright, my friends. Copyright. But I'll say this too with Psycho, with the original, because I know we're going to get into the part 2 and the remake. I don't think I'm with you what Butch said when we were talking about this at the end of the Westworld podcast. I don't think Vince Vaughn did a bad job. I agree with you. I do think he did a good job, but I think when you make the same exact movie that Hitchcock made, you set Vince Vaughn up to fail. Really, if they would have took this and tried to make this their own story, and yet he's playing a mild-mannered Norman Bates in a modern-day world, I could get behind that for sure. And is he or isn't he the killer?
I think you need to play with that more. Isn't he? I don't know. You shouldn't remake it, in my opinion. Like I said, unless you do your own and don't just tell the same story, basically.
I think Vince Vaughn was very poorly cast in that movie.
Really?
To me, he is too virile. He's too confident. You needed somebody like Tobey Maguire. You needed just the last person you would imagine doing anything like that. Vince Vaughn's too confident. And Gus Van Sant Okay, great. Do a shot-for-shot remake of Psycho, whatever. We can get into a lot about that. But if you're going to do that, don't change anything. And when you change something, don't make it something that undermines the rest of the movie. And I'll tell you exactly what I mean. The thing that was the most shocking to me was in that movie when, in the new movie, I guess 1999 Psycho,
somewhere around there,
was when, maybe 98, was when he's watching through the peephole in the shower, and we see him clearly enjoying himself.
Yeah, that's really the only change, isn't it?
Well, yeah, that and the weird thundering buffalo and stuff like that. If Norman, honestly, were capable of even that, he would have had enough self-knowledge and enough of a release that I'm not sure he would have been killing these people. I really think Norman is so repressed and, exists in a world so outside of that even being a discussion. How's he going to find out about that? That being a discussion, that even that is outside of his reckoning.
I totally agree.
So that was, and that no one on the set brought that up. That, this is, you're deviating here.
Yeah.
In a way that totally undermines the rest of the movie. And I remember watching I bought the DVD for the commentary, and it was back when Universal had that very expensive tier of DVDs. They're like $29 or something. It's like, oh, God. So I bought the damn thing when it came out, and I watched it just to hear Gus Van Sant explain himself. He's not a dumb guy. He's a good director. So, this would be a place where he would explain his handiwork. And I'll be damned if Anne Heche didn't talk about something else completely over that moment. So that by the time Van Sant managed to get control of the microphone again, we were so far past that moment that it would have been inappropriate for him to say, okay, now as he's cleaning up the murder, let's talk about that masturbation. No. I mean, you got to talk about the rest of the stuff in the movie at that point. And it's so, as far as I know, no one has called him on the carpet about what's on the carpet, but seriously, about what on earth were you thinking?
I think that if you're going to remake something, and again, I don't hate remakes, but if you're going to remake something, for my money, make it your own movie. You don't have to set it in this hotel, off the highway nowhere. You could, instead of making, Norman Bates this boy who was abused by his mother, make Norman Bates this rich billionaire who owns the biggest hotel in California. But that isn't enough for him, and he's this cold-blooded killer. Do something different. You can do 1,000.
Well, or if you're going to do a shot-by-shot remake, do one of a bad movie. And see, like, let's take, even though I don't think it's a bad movie, let's take Plan 9 from Outer Space, which I think is a good movie. It's just in a very different language than we're used to. But, I guess by a lot of measures, it can be considered bad. So take Plan 9 from Outer Space, keep the script, keep the shot list, all of that, but throw ILM special effects, throw an all Oscar-winning cast at it, and just see as an experiment what might Ed Wood have done if he had, resources like this, and that's the challenge. It's kind of a slap in the face to writers because you're not changing the script, but that's the challenge. Do that.
Yeah, I would definitely watch that.
Yeah, me too. I think. What's the what's your favorite? Because there's two there's two kills in this for the original. So what's your favorite kill in the original?
I think you have to go with the shower.
Well, you got Arbogast.
I mean, I like what they did with the Arbogast scene. It's interesting. You wonder how this little, I don't know, 5'7", 120-pound guy, how he can take down this private investigator, and they do a good job of explaining it. But the shower scene is so iconic. I'm sure Patrick, and I always defer to his wisdom because I know who's smarter, and it's him. Can make up a great defense, but the shower scene to me is just so iconic. I mean, you even open up Psycho 2 with the shower scene, so.
Yeah, I would have just as a proper double blind, I would have recreated the shower scene with Arbogast. He, for some reason, decides to take a shower, maybe to recreate the crime as best he can, and it's shot from Tubby Martin Balsam getting into the and redo that. Well, yeah, obviously the shower scene is one of the great moments of cinema. It's this frenzied to take part of another Hitchcock title. It's this thing where really, thanks to the editing, we're kind of getting the blind frenzy of what's going on from Norman's point of view, certainly emotionally. And that is a very, very, very interesting thing that I think in some ways puts us in Norman's shoes, high-heeled though they probably were. And that is one of those moves, because we've already shifted things when we see Norman looking in through the peephole. Suddenly, we talk about whose movie is this? Whose story are we following? And it was Marion's story. We were seeing things from Marion's point of view right up to that shift. And then at that moment, she's being objectified in a proper sense, in the filmmaking sense. And suddenly we're watching this from Norman's perspective, even though we don't necessarily know it's Norman. I mean, come on. So that's a power, mother blood. That's what we're seeing. And there are hints that it's going to go that way. And the biggest hint that it's going to go that way is the fact that it's during the sandwich scene where they're eating, which sandwich scenes often do involve eating. And it's where they're having the dinner, in the sitting room or whatever. And what's he surrounded by?
Stuffed animals, stuffed
Birds.
Yes, specifically what kind of animals?
birds.
Birds.
What's Marion's last name?
Crane.
And what's a crane?
A bird.
A bird.
Yeah.
I just had a wicked thought. Marion Crane is related to Jonathan Crane, the Batman's villain, the Scarecrow.
Sure. And Bob Crane, where, again, we get a preview of what's going to happen to him. Oh. Speaking of which, now I got thoughts on Psycho 2 that I want to get into whenever we go to that subject. But yeah, I mean, we get a real sense of what's coming down the line when there are all these murdered stuffed animals named after birds, because we keep hearing Marion's last name again and again and again, and it just kind of begins, working in the back of the head.
Yeah. My favorite kill is Arbogast, and I don't know, I can't give you a definitive reason why I choose that over, Marion's death. It's just something I really enjoy because, like Butch said, that you're sort of wondering, okay, how is Norman going to how are they going to get rid of him? Like, because he's poking around. And it's like, is it going to be an accident, or that's sort of what I thought, that Arbogast was going to die of like some sort of weird accident. And then almost in a weird way, he sort of does.
Yeah, he sort of does. It's funny because showers are very dangerous, vulnerable places when you think about it. And stairs are these incredibly dangerous, vulnerable places when you think about it. But we have come to accept them as normal. And one of the great things Hitchcock does in this movie is he shows us that the things that you have convinced yourself are normal and safe, remember back when you didn't think they were normal and safe? They're not normal. They're not safe. Stairs are unbelievably dangerous. I think I have mixed feelings about that staircase murder because it was shot with the best sort of practical effects that they had at the time. But it does look silly. It is both horrifying and unrealistic, and not unrealistic in a way I think Hitchcock wanted. It's very clear that he's on this very smooth rig, kind of going backwards, almost like he's on a track or something. And it just looks, for me, silly. And it's only when it's combined with the feet kind of, close-ups of the feet on the stairs. I don't know how else Hitchcock could have done that with the cameras of the time, given their weight and so on. I almost would have preferred it from Arbogast's point of view. The camera's kind of going wildly back and forth and up and down, and occasionally you just see Norman closer and closer on the stairs as he's coming after him, or something like that. Conceptually, it's a great moment, and it still works, but it kind of has a vague silliness to it also.
I think that's what doing the music, that musical cue, and like you said, the feet, and then when he hits the bottom, it's yeah, you're right, it does look a little Lost in Space-ish, but and I don't mean the TV show, I mean just in general. And so that's why you have that quick cut. Just there's technical limitations, but please God, no one touch this film and try to fix it.
No, although I don't remember how they handled the Arbogast murder in the new one, but that's a place where technically you go in and you do change something, because it's like, we're not limited now. Let's put a GoPro on his head or whatever. Even though they didn't have those, it would have been a larger, like a sombrero or something. But still, let's fix that. How would Hitchcock? It's sort of like when they did the Star Trek remasters, and they did such a good job with the special effects because they sat down and they said, these people, their aesthetics of the time, have managed these effects, these moments, if they had access to modern equipment. And that's if you're Gus Van Sant, that's what you try and do. And you almost do that as a favor for Hitchcock. It's like, Alfred, we know that if you had access to this stuff, this is how you probably would have done it. So we're going to take an educated guess.
Now, the car from Psycho, along with Janet Leigh playing a different character, shows up in Halloween H2O. I don't know if you've ever noticed. But when she's talking to Jamie Lee Curtis, who's playing Carrie Tate, she wishes her a happy Halloween and walks off, and you see the car she drove in Psycho that was buried in the swamp. Really, really cool job by Steve Miner doing that. But what did you guys think about him disposing of Marion Crane in the swamp? That was scary to me.
Yeah.
Very handy.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, and it's a little bit reminiscent of Night of the Hunter.
Yeah.
Dead people in cars, kind of. We don't see it from down there, but yeah, just the whole idea of being, immersed in water and trapped in the, well, it's more water immersion, which, symbolically is usually the beginning of life. And here that it's just this entombment in both cases with Marion.
I tell you,
Here's something. Hold on, I'll be back.
I think it was Marion's car, but it might have been if there was another one. I just remember thinking, how many cars are down there?
Yeah.
How many people are down there?
Yeah. I think that's something too. You can sort of see with Norman because he's worrying about the car, whether it's going to go down. Because maybe by this point, to your point, maybe so many cars are down there that one won't sink to the bottom or go any further. Freaking God, Anthony Perkins did a good job selling with his facial expression, like oh crap.
Am I going to have to go over there and jump on it and then try to jump out, or there's there's so many tropes that are used in later slasher films that show up through this. The disposal of your victims' bodies. I know it's completely different, but it makes me think that Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where they take the bodies and turn it into the food.
Yeah. Yeah, in part two, it's definitely noticeable when they're getting into the cooking contest.
Peppercorn.
Yeah, that's the beautiful
I do
part.
weird things at weird hours. What did I miss?
Oh, we were just talking about Texas Chainsaw 2 while you were gone for a bit. And we were discussing the swamp in the car. Butch was talking about how he doesn't think that was the first car, and I agreed. And you could sort of see it on Anthony Perkins' face that he's selling, or is the car going to go down? And you sort of, okay, that's probably why he's doing that, because it's probably not the first car, and maybe it's so full it won't go down.
He's got a whole car lot down there.
You might as well. What did you guys? How shocked were you by the end of the first film, Butch?
Southern Charm.
The first time I saw it, well, actually, I had bought a Famous Monsters of Filmland. I think we all know about that magazine. I already knew what the ending was, so not overly. It was still done well and interesting, but there was no surprise because I'd already seen a photo of Mother's body and Norman with the mask, the hair coming off. So that to me, that's the sign of a good filmmaker when you already know the ending and it's a shock and you're still interested, you're still drawn in.
Oh, I think surprise is the lamest dimension of storytelling there is, because it works once.
Yeah.
And that's it. And so all of these people, oh, spoilers. So guess what? If you go see Hamlet, the uncle did it. That's not. Oh, guess what? The kid going to see Zorro. Guess what's going to happen to him if you go see Batman? That should not be the measure of good storytelling. That's a side thing. It's like, yeah, the popcorn tastes good when you saw that movie at that time. You're not going to get the same popcorn in the same bucket every time you see the film. So look for other things. And if you're enjoying it, despite knowing the so-called surprises, well, it's a good movie. If the surprise is the only thing the story has going for it, go see something else.
I think it's everything about this movie that it's not just a surprise. It's the character. You guys have been touching upon this throughout this whole movie. It's who we start this story with, and the person we start this story with isn't actually the main character. They're a main character for a moment, but then it switches from what Marion's point of view to like Patrick and Butch have been saying. The fact that Norman's point of view, and I think that's what makes movies so watchable too. Plus, it's not just Norman's point of view; it's Marion's sister's point of view. It's Sam Loomis's point of view. It's our big ass's point of view. We're getting many points of view in one movie.
Mhm.
And that's what makes it so fun. Plus, there's the question of, okay, is it Norman's mother? That all that adds, and that's what makes this movie so unforgettable, and why it's such a classic all these years later.
And I'm going to stick something else right in there. There's so many good supporting actors. No, not there, Patrick. John Anderson there at the beginning as the car salesman, Martin Bason, Simon Oakland at the end. This may have been the first thing I saw him in. And just, I think every actor in this movie does a great job and sells their character and is, and I said before, interesting. And, you know, for me, when I want to describe a good film, good filmmaking versus bad filmmaking, I go to Ben-Hur and Star Wars Episode 1. In both cases, there's a race. In both cases, we know who's going to win. But I can go put Ben-Hur on right now, and I'm going to be drawn into that race, even though I know how it's going to end. I can go put episode 1 in, and I'm bored shitless and wondering why, pardon me there, but why the Tusken Raiders aren't sniping them more. You know, it's like, can this scene hurry up and be over with? That, to me, that's good filmmaking versus bad filmmaking.
Yeah. 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 Episode
How,
1's just a bad movie.
how shocked were
I
you?
mean, there you go.
Yeah. How shocked that you were
Well,
by the end?
Shocked by the surprise revelation because I already knew about that.
Right.
So shocked. I'm still shocked by the passion that Norman is showing, by the abruptness of it all, by the fact that you can't tell if he's come back to Earth or not as they're, arresting him and taking him down, and the wig is coming off, and all those other Star Trek 5 moments.
What did you think, Butch? Were you shocked by how shocked were you by the end?
I'm with Patrick. Pretty much the same. You know, again, I knew the ending, so that part wasn't shocking. But the whole thing together, you know, it's one thing when you like. It's like watching a movie versus reading a recap on Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Can you get the whole story out? Can you get most of the important parts on Wikipedia? You sure can. But watching it be put together by fine craftsmen elevates it and makes it much more interesting.
The movie really, after the death of Marion, actually, most of the movie is very invested in fairly humdrum realism, which makes it, it's hot in a hotel room. There's a toilet. We're eating sandwiches. And yeah, there's the weirdness of the birds, but no, then Norman's eating some hard candy, and it's just kind of dry and unglamorous. And, I won't say it's a documentary, but it's pretty unglamorous on purpose. And, one of the things I noticed, I watched the preview for Psycho 3. We were doing all of this, and I saw how visually rich the decaying Bates Motel was, and how visually rich and textured the Psycho house was, and it looked great. And I thought, geez, why don't the other movies look this atmospheric? And then I thought, because then it's not taking place in the real world. And when you have such humdrum realism that this is not a hotel that's fallen into ruin yet, that this is, the house is Victorian, but it's pretty well kept up, that it's not dusty, there aren't, shafts of light with dust dancing in it and all of that, that it's a normal place. And horror really works best when it's coming from a place of normalcy and comfort.
And there's the shock that Joel's looking for when that happens in the normal places.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's the thing too, that this movie, you're right, it's more of a real world feel. It gives you more realism than it feels like a documentary at times.
It's
And
very, very ordinary.
right, and at the end, even the explanation of Norman feels ordinary.
Hmm.
And once they're zooming in and you hear the mother's voice, it's like, oh my god,
So
that
what's going on under normalcy
right, yep,
all the time with everybody? What voices are going on with the most innocent looking people?
yep. So that's Psycho 1. Psycho 2, guys. When did you guys, Butch, when did you first see Psycho 2?
I actually saw Psycho 2 on HBO. I had a aunt that lived down towards a bigger city, Oak Ridge, which I live in now, and she had cable. And ever so often, I would go down there and spend the night and stay up as late as I could watching films, and that's where I first saw Psycho 2. And I know I was reading Starlog. I don't think I'd graduated to Fangoria by then, but I had read some rather, well, I don't know if I would call them scholarly, but more mature writings. You know, oh, this movie shouldn't be made. You shouldn't make a sequel to Hitchcock. Blah 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 blah. And then another one going, no no no, it's great. We should do it. So I was really interested in seeing it and seeing what they had to tell.
When did you first see it, Patrick?
I saw it in the theaters when it came out,
Oh,
and it was an event. I mean, I don't know if I had seen. I think I had finally maybe seen Psycho at that point, um, but it was a major event. It was one of these things because remakes, sequels, they weren't that common then. And the idea of remaking what was considered one of the greatest movies and one of the most self-contained movies ever made by one of the greatest directors in history, they had to be big as church bells to make that thing. And so and yet the country, because we had not been inundated with sequels and thus bad sequels, the country was up for it. The zeitgeist was perfectly fine with this happening. And it's not like he was directed by Peter Hyams. And so so we liked it. It was very well received. It got good reviews. Critics who be more than happy to stand up for Alfred Hitchcock and say no you don't, were very happy with the film, and I was too. It was an event. I think it was 80. Was it 83 that it came out? Was this 83? I think it was 83. It was one of the event movies of that summer.
I want to say 82. Seemed like it was 22 years, but could have been 83.
But one of the other. But yeah, it was a big deal.
I first saw this on TNT's Monster Vision, hosted by Joe Bob Briggs.
Hmm?
But what a movie! I mean, first of all, to get Anthony Perkins to come back was great, and to see him play Norman Bates, and this was so different than any other horror movie that I would go on to see, because really, what Psycho does is something that Friday the 13th and Halloween, you could dare say Halloween's going to go on to copy. It explores the mind even further, of the mind of the serial killer. How much limits can a mind take, is what it asks you. But not just the mind of the killer, the mind of of other people. And I love the fact that you have this girl who is showering. That you guys touched upon this. There's a shower scene in this too, and what you don't realize is, what you're sort of wondering is, okay, who's peeping through the peephole, and this this other woman is trying to get in Norman Bates's head, and it's like, my God, what did you guys think of that?
I want to similar, but I kind of want to throw another question out too. Would Norman have been all right if the Loomis family had left him alone?
Yeah.
I think so. I do.
So Robert Loggia, I trust. It's a good doctor.
And Loggia. But yeah, the great thing about Psycho 2 is it's not just, and Patrick knows, and I think you know, I love the Friday the 13th films. I grew up on the slashers. It's not another slasher. It's actually an intelligent film. It takes these characters, picks them up 22-ish years later, puts them in an interesting story in an interesting place, and it tells something that I think is perfectly logical. Specifically Vera Miles and her reaction. I mean, it was a very 80s thing where she says right there at the beginning, "Seems like the courts care more about the criminals than the victims."
Oh, that's a real Dirty Harry kind of line.
Yeah, it fits, but it fits the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That's a great movie. It really is. And, there were critics at the time and still today who in some ways consider it to be a better movie than Psycho. It doesn't have the mantle of classic. It doesn't have the screenplay that supports the sort of filmic storytelling virtuosity of Psycho, where, you just get these wonderful moments of pure cinema. No, it's not that. It doesn't purport to be that. It doesn't say, this is the movie you're going to see. No, it's a story. It's a story. It's not a stunt. Psycho in a lot of ways is a stunt. This is a story. And as stories go, it's outstanding. It's interesting. It is theater as opposed to film. Film deals with actions. Theater deals with consequences.
Oh yeah.
And it really it is one of the most respectful sequels I know, because nothing in it can happen without the events of the first film, and yet none of the events of the first film are repeated. So there.
Patrick, you do theater. Do you think it also has the psychology of a theater, sort of a theater play in a sense?
I guess so. I mean, while I just got done talking about the difference between the two types of storytelling, good movies, good plays, both are going to have the same drive for psychology. I think the theatrical aspect of this movie is that, in some ways, even more than Psycho, it's a chamber piece. It really invests in these sets and in just a few characters, and I think one of the things that it really has going for it is this thought or this hope of how much does Norman know, and how much is he just trying to bait Meg Tilly into showing her hand? And I think specifically when he's kind of playing the piano towards the end of the movie, he says, "But we can't get out," and so on. I think he's messing with her in a big way. I think at that point, he pretty much knows what's going on. It's like even when he's on the phone with Robert Loggia and he's calling Robert Loggia mother, which is something that, I would hope would only be happening off camera. But is he doing that because he somehow has gone someplace else? Or is he doing that to kind of let Loggia know, hey, I'm dealing with a nut here. Oh, by the way, here she is on the phone. So Loggia's character knows that he is there with Meg Tilly, and that now he likes Meg Tilly a lot, and I made him mad. Well, let's lean in and see what's he doing. It looks like he grabbed a broom or something. I don't know. And Robert Loggia then chooses to show up. Oh, hey, Jewel. Jewel, go on. It looks like there's a ghost floating behind him on a disco ball.
Maybe that's the one that actually has the halo.
What's going on? Oh, what did he do to that ghost? Did he have consent?
It was implied. I tell you, I remember watching this on HBO, and again, I would have been in my early teens. I was unimpressed. I was like, oh God, can something hurry up and happen? And rewatching it here, and it was like, again, I'm gonna reach through and slap myself. It's like this is a much better film than I remembered. Though at the time, I really did not like Meg Tilly's character.
Well, I mean, you're not dealing with a fireball of charisma there.
No.
You know, I remember when I was watching the movie tonight, I just said, to hunt Meg Tilly, one must think like Meg Tilly. Just doesn't take a lot of work. You know, she never made another movie that I can recall. It was this and The Big Chill.
Did you ever see
And that Pound?
Bound, B-O-U-N-D.
Bound.
Yeah,
I guess she was in that.
It's not bad.
I think Anthony Hopkins really makes this movie watchable, and I mean his performance it's even better than the first one. I would say it's just as good of it, and he really. You want to talk about a character and a killer who just portrays the utmost intelligence and is trying to, at the same time, keep his sanity that he just got, for the first time in forever. Psycho 2 brings all the psychology of the first one forward and to the forefront, really.
And none of the calories.
Yep.
Sure. And it's not reliant on the same type of surprise.
Yep.
Now that we know what Norman's problem was, we can get much closer to him, because now it's a question of Norman questioning himself rather than the audience questioning what's up with Norman. We're kind of still with Norman, but it's a matter of, okay, well, what am I seeing? Is what I'm seeing real, or is what I'm seeing not real? Yeah.
What did you think?
Yeah. And I like Psycho 3 a lot, and I like Psycho 4. I think they're all good movies.
Yeah, I was hoping somebody would bring up Psycho 4. I think it's a very underrated film. I remember recording that like 2 o'clock in the morning on some channel and finally getting to see that one. And just the thing for me with all these films is I watch them. You're supposed to, like we switch our sympathies from Janet Leigh to Norman Bates in the first one. And it's like, I do feel sorry for Norman in the first film. I do feel sorry for Norman in the second film, because I mean he's just being totally screwed with, understandably so. And in the third film, I still feel like it's like I still feel sorry for him. And by the fourth, and each time I'm like, can he break the cycle? Can he break the cycle? Can he break the cycle? And finally, with 4, I don't know, I can't remember if we knew if Perkins was not in good health or what, but we got some resolution rather than setting it up for yet another sequel.
Yeah.
It justifies also, of course, it's from the original screenwriter. It justifies also any faith that we had in Norman Bates throughout the other 3 movies. So we didn't feel like, dumb or duped by Anthony Perkins' charm or something like that.
I think Psycho's one that, again, because you see there's these movies that there's a sequel after a sequel after a sequel after a sequel after a sequel. Psycho's not that. I think Psycho stopped at one of the best points of its trilogy. Or, sorry, not trilogy, but the franchise. And I think Anthony Perkins and Norman Bates are really unappreciated when it comes to, because when I hear names, I hear Michael Myers, I hear Jason Voorhees, I hear Freddy Krueger, and don't get me wrong, I grew up with those too. But there's something about Norman Bates that I think literally, I was talking about this when I did my Ed Gein video, that the guy who wrote the book, Psycho, was from Wisconsin.
Robert Bloch?
Yeah. He was, Ed Gein was happening, the trial, and he wrote the book. It's like, that's what makes this all the more interesting. The fact that you get 4 films, and don't get me wrong, Friday the 13th got way more, but the fact you get 4 films out of an Ed Gein inspired character to me is impressive.
And a Star Trek episode where there are lots of murders that take place.
Let me ask you two a question that I would like your opinions on. I feel like at the end of Psycho 2, or towards the end, they were like, okay, we need to have some kind of something. We got to have some kind of shock. And with the revelation, allegedly, that woman was actually Norman's mother. What did you think of that? It always seemed a little, what? Now, there is a great special effects scene with that shovel that is just amazing. But as for the whole, no, she wasn't really your mother, I was. What do y'all think about that? Because, I don't know, it seemed like an attempt to try and give a shock.
I think, sure. And why not? You know, if there's a genre where you're going to have an attempt to give somebody a shock, let it be this one. To me, I think it's actually a moment that ultimately lets Norman off the hook. You know, it's like, oh, this is someone else's fault all the way. Because, and here's the reason. Even if she were just, you know, Aunt Agatha or whatever, she could have been part of his life somehow. She could have been, because it's clear she was just irresponsible and cruel, not crazy. And I think maybe Norman knows when she shows up, it's like, oh, okay. And because doesn't she work at the restaurant?
Mm-hmm.
Or is she? Yeah, so they probably were standing next to each other at the urinal one day, and he looked over, oh my God, we're exactly alike. So he knew early on that they were related. And, but you know, he knows when she comes in, because he goes for the tea before she, you know, comes out of the closet with that stuff. And, you know, if I were Norman, I would be thinking, so most of my suffering came from being trapped with this crazy woman and no other voice except for guests who were coming and going, who, even if I found a nice one, they were gone, either because I killed them or they just drove to, you know, someplace else. And here's this person who, even just as my aunt, because she was my aunt, no, she was my mom, I was living with my, anyway, could have made my life better, could have been some sort of voice of reason or tempering, or could have been another source of love in my life. And you decided to be irresponsible. By God, now you tell me? Why didn't you tell me when I got out of the nut house? I really could have used you. Maybe she did if she was calling him saying, I'm your mother. But it was a screwed up series of phone calls. So yeah, it was abrupt, but it was still satisfying to me. It was like one more thing that made me go, okay, yeah, I know people who love ambiguity in stories, and sometimes I do too, but sometimes I love a good shot of clarity. And it's like, after 2 movies that are all based on ambiguity, to have anyone just come out and say, Norman, here's one thing about your past that's absolutely God's honest the truth. There is something, there's some closure to that. And I appreciate it on that level.
You know, when I first saw that shovel shot as a kid, I'm sitting there watching this at night with my grandfather. And he goes, you know, your grandmother did that to me once, son. And I'm like, get the hell out of here. But I think, you know, that's what I found most shocking too, when she says this and he hits her with that shovel. I think that's what because I'm sitting there like this, like, what a touching moment this is. What a happy time for him. And bam!
Bam!
The shovel. The shovel is the shock, not the announcement. The shovel.
The shock to me is that it was not a slightly hollower sound, more of a boom, and we didn't hear the sound of birds tweeting as she fell over, which, you know, as any doctor will tell you, is what you hear when you've been fatally struck with a shovel between being seated in death. And that's where the movie betrays its realism. The other problem is that her head did not take on the shape of the inside of the shovel briefly and then pop back to normal. Which
a shovel takes the imprint of her head.
Yeah, like if he had gotten her with the top of a garbage can lid, it would have, you know.
Well, for me, you know what it was? There was no crowd chanting, ECW, ECW. But no.
Is that a wrestling thing?
Yeah, it was a wrestling thing a long time ago in the 90s. It was a company that did hardcore matches all the time.
Like Colt or what was the company?
Extreme Championship Wrestling.
Oh, okay. Okay.
ECW.
Okay.
But it's really interesting that, like I said, the shock for me is the shovel, because you're so by the end of this movie, you're more relaxed. It's like, oh wow, because you think nothing else can happen. It's like, oh wow, you know what about? And it's like, oh and my grandfather said, "Don't say it." But that was like, I almost said it. He's like, "Don't say it." But I think that's the best reaction you can have for a sequel. Really, I mean, Halloween 2, the hospital explosion. I went, holy shit. But, you know, I want that out of a sequel. That's what makes a sequel. It pays tribute to the original, but it doesn't try to be the original. It doesn't try to clone it or copy it. It tries to be its own movie going off the original.
It's a continuation.
Yep. I think that's, like, Jaws 2 is good. I love Jaws 2. It doesn't try to be Jaws 1 to me. And it's fun to watch. That's another movie we're going to have to do. But is there anything you guys want to add before we go? Butch?
Yeah, I want to shout out to Virginia Gregg, who you may or may not know. She was one of the voices of Mother in Psycho 1 and was the voice in 2 and 3. She's in a lot of Dragnet, the later 60s and early 70s color Dragnet with Jack Webb. That her voice, there's right there around when the shovel and all that, and you hear that, Norman. I've always hated that voice, and I was a kid. I was watching Dragnet, and I heard her. She said something. I'm like, oh God, she sounds like Norma Bates. And found out years later, it's she. That's because she is.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, my last thing is I like this movie a lot. I like Psycho a lot. And I like the topic of California Gothic a lot. If you haven't been out to California, you haven't spent much time there, it's amazing that things so theoretically recent, and of course I haven't been there for, nearly 30 years. So, but at the time there were still all of these remnants of old Hollywood, but old Hollywood was only, 20 or 30 years old at the time. But still, there's something about California where things, maybe it's the weather, things just look instantly run down and crappy like that. And there is this sense of desolation. I mean, even on Hollywood Boulevard, I remember when I first went there, just how dry and kind of lonely and sad and unglamorous this theoretically beautiful place is supposed to be. So to me, California Gothic as a subject matter, I mean, it's Sunset Boulevard, is something really ripe. Now, there is a movie, I would love to talk to you guys about this. There's a movie called Spider Baby. That's Lon Chaney Jr. I think it's his last movie, or one of his last movies. And personally, I think it's maybe a better movie than Psycho. I enjoy it more than Psycho. It has more comedy to it, but it's not all comedy.
No.
And it has similarities stylistically, visually, somewhat thematically to Psycho, but is very different. It's from Quentin Tarantino's favorite director. So, Jewel, that might excite you. Butch, don't hold it against it. And it's a fantastic film. And
how can you hold anything against a movie that has Sid Haig and Lon Chaney Jr.?
You can't. You can't. It's a movie that works on every level. And I think it's free on Tubi.
I believe it's pretty easy to find. You actually told me to introduce me to that movie a long time ago. We watched it. Yeah.
It's a great movie.
A great film. Love it.
Yeah.
All right. How do you guys feel about doing 2 movies next Saturday?
What 2? Because I was thinking of 2, but you tell me.
Well, Spider Baby I'm gonna watch, but we could do like 2 movies that don't connect to each other. Or what 2 did you have in mind?
I was gonna suggest The Wicker Man.
Wait, the original or remake?
There is no remake of Wicker Man, and don't ever say that ever again.
Well, yeah, but Butch, it's a good opportunity to kick the remake around, and you don't have to see it again. And I think one of the things the remake does is that it clarifies and specifies many of the hidden reasons why the original is so good, because of where and how it deviates. Because you see a movie like The Wicker Man, and you just come out and you're just 3 feet off the ground. And it's just such an amazing film that everything about it is just a gestalt of good.
Yeah.
You're just floating on this cloud of emotion and horror and yet joy, and it's got tons of stuff in it that it almost makes you not want to analyze it that much, because you don't want to break the spell. And yet there are mechanical reasons why it works. And then you go see the remake, which is a movie I led a revolt against in the theater on opening night, and I got the audience on my side. And when you step back, it becomes very clear what the original did correctly. So that's my argument for why at least including discussion of the remake in it is a good idea.
I'll tell you what. Next,
but why don't we could do Spider Baby and Wicker Man as 2 folk horror movies?
I'll tell you.
I figured Joe would ask if we had any suggestions, so I had my 2 suggestions also.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
has nothing to do with what y'all brought up. From Beyond and Reanimator.
That's a good choice.
A great movie. They're both great movies.
She'll know your secret.
Yeah.
Oh,
Heads up, it's a good Barbara Crampton film.
Yep. So we're gonna do what? Spider Baby and Wicker Man?
Here's what we'll do. We'll do Spider Baby and Wicker Man next Saturday. And then the weekend after that, we'll do From Far Beyond and the other movie, Reanimator. That's what we'll do.
That's a great.
Those are great. Those are great selections, guys. So, to Butch RosenBalm, my friend Patrick McCray, my friend, these gentlemen are always on their game. They are very, very awesome. Go check out Patrick McCray on Twitter. Go check out the Dark Shadows Daybook. Link will be in the description box. Go buy it, goddamn it, if you don't have it. Butch RosenBalm, he's the man. Guys, first of all, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Jewel, before you hit that button, thank you. And you know what? No matter how awful the week is, it ends fantastically when I get to spend this time with you guys. I really mean it. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. I agree on what he said, plus more.
Yep, it's always great to hear from you guys. You guys are awesome, and I always hope I always think about you guys. And then I hope Butch and Patrick are having great weeks. But So, guys, have a great weekend. Rest of the weekend. I'm going to watch some football tomorrow, but have a great week. Hope you guys have a great week, and we'll see you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.